People often say the library is the most peaceful place on campus. They say that because they have never stayed at Oak Haven Library after 2 a.m. When the lights from the distant dorms go out and darkness swallows the campus, the silence here does not bring a sense of peace. It feels like you are being crushed at the bottom of the ocean. I have been the only night shift employee here for the past 6 months. The job sounds ideal for a 4-year-old senior needing tuition money and space to write a thesis. Sitting at the reception desk, shelving a few books, and making sure no students are sleeping in hidden corners. But Oak Haven Library is not an ordinary building. Built in 1924 with neo-Gothic architecture, this place looks more like an abandoned church than a repository of knowledge. The soaring, drafty ceilings groan whenever the wind turns, and the smell of this place, a mixture of rotting paper, old book glue, and perennial dust, clings to my clothes even when I go home. On the first day of work, the library manager, Mrs. Abernathy, a thin woman with eyes that always looked alert, gave me a laminated paper to stick right next to the computer screen. "This is the closing procedure," she said, her voice hoarse. "Please follow it strictly, especially item number 4. I glanced at the paper. "Lock the rare book section door at 11 p.m. Check the restrooms on the 3rd floor at 1 a.m. Turn off lights in the west section at 2 a.m. 4. If you hear noise from the book drop after midnight, absolutely do not open the door to check immediately. Wait at least 10 minutes or until the noise stops completely." At that time I laughed. "Why? Do raccoons crawl in there?" Mrs. Abernathy did not smile. She stared at me, her fingers tapping lightly on the cold oak desk. "Just follow the instructions, Mr. Evans, for your safety." I thought it was an old person's superstitious joke, or maybe giant rats in this damp town often crawl in there to nest. For the past 6 months, I have never had any problems. The book drop, a metal chute connecting from the outer wall straight into a large padded bin, with padding right next to my desk, was always silent after midnight. Students these days aren't diligent enough to return books at that hour, but tonight was different. Outside, a cold October rain was lashing against the towering stained glass windows. The wall clock showed 2:47 a.m. I was absent-mindedly scrolling through my phone when a sudden cold draft rushed in, rustling the sticky notes on my desk, even though all windows were closed. And then I heard it. Thud. The sound came from the book drop. It was heavy, solid, and firm. Not like the sound of a paperback book falling. It sounded like a hunk of meat wrapped in thick cloth being thrown hard into an empty metal bin. I held my breath, eyes glued to the gap in the bin. Reflexively, I was about to stand up to check who would return a book in the middle of a storm at nearly 3 a.m. But then, Mrs. Abernathy's voice echoed in my head, as clear as if she were standing right behind me. "Absolutely do not open the door to check immediately." My hand froze in midair. A chill ran down my spine. Not from the room temperature, but a primal biological reaction. Something was in that bin, and I swear, amidst the sound of rain outside, I heard another sound coming from inside the metal bin. The sound of fingernails scratching lightly against the bin wall. Scratch. Scratch. I sat motionless, eyes glued to that gray metal bin, counting every second on the computer screen. The rule said wait at least 10 minutes, but I had waited nearly 30 minutes. By 3:15 a.m., the scratching sound had stopped completely. The silence returned, heavier than before. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. Reason began to return, trying to dispel the irrational fear from earlier. "You're overreacting, Evans," I told myself. Maybe a stray cat crawled in from the outside slot, or some drunk guy pranking. I stood up, legs slightly numb. I walked slowly towards the book drop. This bin is an industrial type, about 1.5 meters deep, with a spring-loaded bottom to dampen the shock when books fall. I placed my hand on the bin lid. The metal was ice cold, transmitting a bone-chilling cold through my fingertips. Taking a deep breath, I yanked the lid open. There was no cat, no rat. Only a single book lay solitary in the middle of the empty bin bottom. I frowned, reaching out to pick it up. It was a hardcover copy of The Great Gatsby, an old edition with a blue cloth cover frayed at the corners. It was freezing, much colder than room temperature, as if it had just been taken out of a freezer. But what bothered me was not the book, but its smell. It didn't have the smell of dust or old paper typical of libraries. It smelled faintly of damp earth, the kind of black, porous soil you smell after a heavy rain in a deep forest. I flipped to the back cover of the book to check the barcode for system entry, but this book had no barcode. It was so old it still used the manual checkout card system. A small paper pocket glued to the inside cover, containing a yellowed cardboard card for stamping due dates. Curious, I pulled the card out. The last ink line was stamped in bright red, slightly smudged from moisture, but still clear enough to read under the pale fluorescent light. Due date, the 14th of October, 2004. My hand trembled. Today is the 14th of October, 2026. This book is exactly 22 years overdue. I flipped the card over and over, trying to find a logical explanation. Maybe someone cleaned the attic, found their parents' old book, and casually threw it in here? That's the only explanation. But why is it so cold? And why does that red stamp look as fresh as if it had just been stamped yesterday? I threw the book on the desk, intending to deal with it in the morning. I tried to get back to my thesis, but I couldn't concentrate. The feeling that someone was peeking kept clinging to the back of my neck. And then I realized a detail that earlier, in my panic, I had overlooked. On that yellowed library card, next to the date, was the borrower's name written neatly in blue ink, Sarah Miller. This name sounded very familiar, extremely familiar. The name Sarah Miller kept spinning in my head, but not because I knew her. It was that weird deja vu feeling when you hear a name mentioned in ghost stories in the dorms, stories that you usually scoff at and dismiss. Unable to resist curiosity, I logged into the legacy archive system on the computer. This is the antiquated digitized database the university uses to store student records from before 2010. The screen flickered with eye-straining blue light, the mouse cursor spinning impatiently slow in the deadly silence of the library. I typed Miller, Sarah, class of 2006. Enter. A profile appeared. The student ID photo showed a young girl with blonde hair, a bright smile, and bright eyes. But the red text running across the profile made my stomach knot. Status: deceased. File closed. I opened another tab, accessing the press archives of the Oakhaven Gazette. It didn't take me long to find the article I needed. It was right on the front page of the issue, dated the 15th of October 2004. Female student dies in tragic car accident on stormy night. I devoured every word, and the more I read, the more the goosebumps on my arms stood out clearly. Sarah Miller, 20 years old, English literature student, lost control of her Ford Taurus on Route 9 on the night of October 14. The car plunged down the embankment and flipped over. Time of death recorded by police was around 11:45 p.m. I glanced at the Great Gatsby book lying on the desk. Due date is October 14. Library closing time in 2004 was midnight. She died while on her way here to return this book. I pushed my chair back, the wheels grinding against the tiled floor, creating a piercing sound echoing through the great hall. It's a joke, I whispered, trying to let my own voice break the thick atmosphere. It must be a sick joke. That is the only logical explanation. Maybe someone found this book at the scene of the accident years ago? Or her family kept it as a memento and is now selling it in a garage sale? A group of students bought it, looked up the history, and decided to scare the new night shift guy, me. I tried to cling to that thought, that some idle student was hiding in the bushes outside, giggling while watching me panic through the glass window. I stood up, walked to the window to look out, hoping to see someone's silhouette, but outside, there was only pitch-black rain and yellow streetlights casting shadows of spindly tree branches onto the deserted sidewalk. No one was there. When I turned back to the desk, I froze. The smell of damp earth from the book had changed. In the few minutes I turned away, the scent emanating from the Great Gatsby book became more pungent. But now it wasn't just the smell of mud. It had a sickly, sweet, nauseating undertone. It was the smell of lilies, the flower often used in funerals, but flowers that had been left to rot in vase water for too long. And worse, the blue cloth cover of the book was darkening. A small, murky puddle of water was oozing out from the book pages, spreading slowly across my wooden desk. I intended to call in sick the following night. All that day, I kept scrubbing my hands with antibacterial soap until the skin was red and cracked, but I still felt the greasy film from the Great Gatsby clinging to my fingertips. But then, student loans and expensive rent pulled me back to that torn cushion chair behind the reception desk. I reassured myself that last night was just a bizarre coincidence. I had stuffed Sarah Miller's book into a cardboard box, taped it shut tight, and threw it into the deepest corner of the closed archive storage room. But at 3:03 a.m., the nightmare began again. This time there was no harsh metallic clanging sound. Instead, there was a wet, slimy sound. Imagine the sound of throwing a water-soaked sponge onto the bathroom floor from a height of 2 meters. Splat. Followed by a dripping sound. Drip. 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 Fast and urgent, echoing inside the hollow metal bin. My stomach churned. I knew I shouldn't open it. Rule number 4 told me to wait. But that smell hit me before I could decide. It wasn't the smell of rotten lilies anymore. This time, the library air was invaded by the fishy stench of stagnant pond mud, the smell of dead algae and perennial mold. It was so strong I had to cover my nose, eyes stinging. Trembling, I approached, using my foot to lightly kick the lid release latch instead of using my hand. The lid popped open. Lying askew at the bottom of the bin was a thick, large format textbook. The cover was deep red, but had now turned to a dull brown from being waterlogged. It was the Atlas of Human Anatomy by Frank Netter. It was sodden, not like it got caught in rain. It was waterlogged as if it had been soaked at the bottom of a lake for decades. Water from the book flowed out black, thick as motor oil, dripping heavily onto the bottom of the bin. The pages were swollen, deformed into a mushy pulp mass. I held my breath, using a long pencil to flip the book cover open, trying not to touch that black liquid. The library card pocket had disintegrated, but the plastic card inside remained intact, though covered in mud. I squinted to read the text printed by an old typewriter. Borrower, Jason Reed. Due date, the 7th of May, 1998. Jason Reed. I remembered this name, not because I knew him, but because of a small memorial plaque placed next to the artificial lake on the south side of campus. I turned back to the computer, typing frantically with trembling hands. News from 1998 appeared on the screen. Jason Reed, first-year medical student, missing during finals week. His body was found 3 days later, entangled in tree roots at the bottom of Oakhaven Lake. Police concluded accidental drowning due to intoxication, though his friends insisted Jason never drank. I looked back at the book drop. That anatomy book weighed at least 2 kilograms when dry. Now, waterlogged, it must weigh 4 to 5 kilograms. How could someone throw it in here without leaving water traces on the floor? I looked down at the tiled floor outside the book drop. Bone dry. Not a single drop of water. But inside the bin, that black water was starting to seep out through the metal seams, dripping onto the floor behind my reception desk. And as that black puddle spread, I saw something mixed in that slimy mud mess. It was eelgrass, the type of weed that only grows at the bottom of Oakhaven Lake. It was fresh. What the hell is this? I backed away, my back slamming hard into the bookshelf behind me. Just then, the CCTV screen pointing directly at the area outside the book drop door suddenly flickered continuously. The grainy black and white image jerked, then stabilized. And I saw it, on the grainy black and white screen of camera number 4, angled directly at the side door with the book drop slot. Someone was standing there, or at least it had a shape resembling a human. That shadow stood with its back to the camera, facing directly towards the book drop slot. It wore a long raincoat, drooping and sodden. But the body proportions were completely wrong. It was too tall. Its head was cut off by the top edge of the camera frame, meaning it had to be over 2 meters tall. And the arm, God, its right arm hung down by its side, so long that the fingers, if those were really fingers, reached all the way to the calf. My heart pounded in my chest as if it wanted to burst through my ribs. I whipped my head around to look out the tempered glass window about 10 meters from my desk. From where I sat, I could clearly see the area outside the book drop slot. It was completely empty outside, only streaks of rainwater running down the glass and yellow streetlight casting on the deserted sidewalk. No giant there, no one wearing a raincoat. I turned back to the screen. It was still standing there. A chill ran from my neck to my heels, paralyzing me. I was seeing something that existed on the camera, but did not exist in reality. Or worse, is the camera recording something my naked eye cannot see? My trembling hand grabbed the mouse, rewinding the footage. I wanted to know where it came from. 2:55 a.m. It hadn't appeared. 2:56 a.m. The screen suffered heavy interference, white horizontal lines shredding the image for about 3 seconds. 2:56 a.m. Continue. It was standing there, didn't walk into the frame, didn't approach from afar, It simply appeared after the static, standing motionless like a wax statue forgotten in the rain. I fast-forwarded back to real time. 3:08 a.m. On the screen, the shadow began to move. Not smoothly like a living person. It moved jerkily, like a puppet with broken strings, or a video missing frames. That long, spindly arm slowly raised up, its elbow joint bent at an angle that human bone could not achieve. Its hand held something thick, the sodden anatomy book I had just received. It pushed the book into the slot. At the same time, in reality, right behind me, the book drop lid made a small squeak. Even though I knew the book was already inside the bin, the sound of metal clashing still rang out, coinciding with the action on the screen. And then, it turned its head. Although the camera was placed behind its back, its neck rotated 180 degrees slowly, smoothly, as if oiled, until its face was directly facing the camera lens. I screamed a choked scream in my throat and fell backward in my chair. It had no face. Where eyes, nose, and mouth should be, there was only a flat surface, smooth like boiled pork skin, pale and waterlogged. Nothing at all. Just a soulless white void staring at the camera, looking through the screen, staring straight at me. Suddenly, the screen went black. The blue text, "No signal," flashed, mocking my panic. The whole library fell into silence. Only the sound of dirty water from the anatomy book dripping onto the floor behind me remained. I couldn't sit there anymore. The blue no signal screen kept flashing like a demon's eye mocking me. Nausea hit me. I staggered up and rushed into the staff restroom about 10 meters away. I turned the cold water tap to the max, splashing it continuously on my face. The icy water soothed the panic, but it couldn't wash away the image of that flat, pale face from my mind. I stared into the mirror, my face pale, eyes bloodshot from stress. Calm down, I slapped my cheek lightly. The camera system is just glitching. You're scaring yourself, Evans. I took 3 deep breaths, dried my face with a paper towel, and walked out. I had only left my desk for less than 3 minutes, but when I returned, the atmosphere around the desk had changed. It was thick. The acrid smell of ozone hung in the air, like the smell of lightning after a big storm, but mixed with the disgusting smell of burnt grilled meat. I looked at my desk. Lying right on the computer keyboard, pressing down on my unfinished thesis, was a third book. My feet froze, glued to the floor. I didn't hear the book drop. I didn't hear footsteps. I had only been gone for 3 minutes. How could someone enter, place this book on my desk, and disappear without making a single sound? I approached, step by step, as if approaching an unexploded bomb. It was Dante's Inferno, a red hardcover edition. But the red of the cover was half blackened by soot. The edges were curled and scorched. The cover blistered like severely burned human skin, and it was smoking. Thin, gray wisps of smoke rose, swirling in the desk lamplight. I reached out, hesitating, then lightly touched the cover with my index finger. I jerked my hand back. It was hot. Not warm. Burning hot. Not just the heat of dying embers, but the moist, sticky warmth of a living creature. It was warm, as if an invisible, burning hand had been gripping it tightly for hours, and had just set it down right before I walked out of the restroom. I suppressed my nausea, using a pen to flip the charred cover open. The library card inside had been made brittle by the heat, but was still readable. Borrower, Michael Vance. Due date, the 22nd of November 2012. West Dormitory, 2012. An electrical short caused a fire on the 3rd floor on Thanksgiving night. 3 students didn't make it out. Michael Vance was one of them. They say he went back to his room to get something important. Maybe this book? I looked around wildly into the darkness, covering the giant bookshelf surrounding me. The feeling of being watched was no longer just a feeling. It was an obvious fact. "Who's there?" I called, voice cracking. "If this is a joke, it's not funny. Come out." Only the echo of my voice bouncing off the cold stone walls. But then, I realized something even more terrible. To place this book on my keyboard, that thing didn't just walk through the main door. It had to stand right where I am standing. It had to sit in my chair. It was right here, inside the circulation desk. And then, the receipt printer next to me suddenly roared to life. Zip. Zip. The data light flashed madly. It started printing automatically. The thermal printer screeched in bursts. Zzz, zzz, zzz. sounding like a razor blade grinding against glass in the deadly silent space. The thin white strip of paper poured out of the slot, growing longer and longer, coiling on the floor like a giant tapeworm. I stood rooted to the spot, eyes glued to the pitch-black text being printed at breakneck speed. Normally, this machine only prints fine receipts for students returning books a few days late, with fines of a few pennies. But the content on this paper was not about money. Overdue notice, mandatory recall. The headline was printed in bold, huge letters. Below was a long list, clearly divided into columns. Item name, borrower, status. I bent down, picking up the beginning of the paper, my hand shaking so much I almost tore it. Item: Converse sneaker. Borrower: Timmy Gallagher. Age 7. Status: missing in Black Forest, 1978. Overdue 48 years. Item: 18K gold wedding ring. Borrower: Martha Higgins. Status: murdered at home 1992. Overdue 34 years. Molar, number 6. Borrower: John Doe. Status: found in Building B Foundation, 1955. Overdue 71 years. My stomach knotted. This was not a list of borrowed books. This is a list of relics. Things attached to those who died or mysteriously disappeared in this town of Oakhaven. Over the last half-century, the printer kept screeching. The paper strip was now meters long, covering a corner of the floor around my feet in white. Hundreds of names scrolled past my eyes. Unsolved cases, tragic accidents, lost children who never returned. All of them seem to have been borrowed from this library, or rather this library considers their lives as property belonging to it. Suddenly, the printer went silent. The sudden silence made my ears ring. The paper strip was cut cleanly. I grabbed the last part of the paper that had just fallen out. The last line had no date. It also didn't say overdue. Item: light brown eyes. Borrower: Thomas Evans. Status: processing. Thomas Evans. That is my name. I dropped the paper, backing away, slamming into the metal filing cabinet. Processing. It doesn't see me as an employee. It sees me as an item to be recalled. I needed to get out of here. Immediately. I turned to rush towards the main door, but my eyes caught something wedged in the gap of the old filing cabinet behind me. The cabinet Mrs. Abernathy told me never to use because the lock was jammed. But now, the lock was pried open, and sticking out was the spine of a pitch-black leather notebook covered in dust. It was Arthur's cabinet, the night shift guy before me, who they said quit to go back to his hometown urgently. I yanked the notebook out. If I wanted to survive tonight, I needed to know what Arthur saw before he vanished. My trembling hand flipped open the black leather notebook. The first pages were written neatly, recording daily trivial tasks. Change bulbs, clean tables and chairs, check windows. But later on, the handwriting became more skewed, etched deep into the paper, as if the writer was gripping the pen tightly in extreme panic. I flipped to the last page. No date. Only hastily written lines, ink smudged by sweat or tears. If anyone is reading these lines, it means I have run out of time. I made a mistake. I touched them. It is not a ghost. Don't call it a ghost. It is the archivist. It doesn't care about books. It cares about completion. Those who died suddenly, they died when their lives were unfinished. An unreturned book, an unfulfilled promise. They return here to close their files. But the archivist doesn't just collect books. It collects things attached to that dead. If you touch returned items with bare hands, you have left your biological trace on them. You become part of the overdue file. The last line was underlined so hard it tore the paper. It hates noise. It is blind, but it can hear your heartbeat. If you hear the book cart, don't run. Hold your breath. The notebook fell from my hand, hitting the floor with a dry thud. I looked down at my hands. I had touched the Great Gatsby. I had touched the Anatomy Atlas. I even poked the Burning Inferno with my finger. My fingerprints, sweat, warmth, all stuck to things belonging to the dead. I had inadvertently signed my name to its recall list. Suddenly, a loud explosion rang out from the basement, like a circuit breaker being blown. Boom. All lights in the library went out. Darkness descended immediately, thick and suffocating. like black velvet gagging my eyes. Only a faint, ghostly blue light remained from the computer screen, still running on UPS backup power. The computer cooling fan, word UU, sounding pathetic in this vast space. And then, from the deep darkness of the corridor leading to the basement archive, a new sound rang out. Squeak, squeak, squeak. It was the sound of rusty metal wheels rolling on hard tiles. The sound of an old book cart. It didn't move fast. It rolled slowly, rhythmically, inching towards the main hall. The sound of metal grinding against metal echoed, bouncing off the stone walls, making it impossible for me to pinpoint exactly where it was. But I knew it was getting closer. The stench rose again. This time it wasn't the individual smell of each book anymore. It was a disgusting mixture of earth, sewage, burnt meat, and formalin used to preserve corpses. I covered my mouth tightly, trying to stop the gasp that was about to escape. The light from the computer screen was fading. The backup battery was running out. I had to leave the reception desk. This place was too exposed. It is blind, Arthur had written, but it hears heartbeats. And right now, my heart was beating so hard I was afraid that it echoed like a war drum in this damn space. Squeak. The cart sound had reached the top of the stairs. It was on the same floor with me. The computer screen flickered one last time and then died completely. The only remaining light source vanished, plunging me into absolute blackness. Now I was completely blind, but my hearing, in the throes of life and death, became painfully acute. Squeak. The sound of the cartwheels rang out again, much closer. It had left the stairwell area and was entering the main hall. Accompanying that rusty metal sound was the sound of footsteps. Thud, drag, thud, drag. One foot stepped heavily like a boot, the other dragged on the floor like a soft sack of meat. I knew I couldn't stay at the reception desk. That's the first place it would look. It knew I was here, the processing list had made that clear. I bent down, trembling hands hastily untying my sneakers. If it could hear a heartbeat, the sound of rubber soles rubbing against tiles would be like a siren. I stuffed the shoes into the bottom drawer of the desk, biting my lip until it bled to make no sound. Bare feet touching the cold tiled floor made me shiver. I crawled out from the counter, crawling on all fours towards the reference section. The bookshelves there reached the ceiling and were packed close together like a maze, the best hiding place right now. Squeak. The cart stopped. It was standing right in front of the reception desk, where I sat 10 seconds ago. I tucked myself behind the EF European History bookshelf, pressing my back against the hard book spines, hands covering my mouth and nose tightly. My heart beat wildly in my chest, so hard I felt like my ribs were vibrating. Please, I prayed. Please don't hear my heartbeat. Crack. A crisp sound rang out from the reception desk. It was the sound of the computer keyboard being crushed. It is looking for me. It was groping the desk surface where I had just sat. Crash. My ceramic pen cup was swiped onto the floor, shattering. Then came the sniffing sound. Huff, huff, deep, wet sniffing sounds, like a dog sniffing for fresh meat. But its lungs were larger, hollower, creating a roaring wind sound like a blacksmith's bellows. The stench drifted with the draft to my hiding place. The smell of formalin hit hard, stinging my eyes, tears streaming uncontrollably. I wanted to cough. My throat itched terribly. I had to use both hands to strangle my own throat, fingernails digging deep into the flesh to stop the cough from bursting out. Squeak. The cart started moving again. It wasn't heading towards the exit. It was moving along the rows of bookshelves. It was coming towards me. I shut my eyes tight, though opening them would see nothing. I heard it muttering. Not a human voice. It was a chaotic mess of sounds, pieced together from many different voices. A deep man's voice, a clear woman's voice, a shrill child's voice, all sounding at once, out of sync, overdue, unreturned. Eyes. Need eyes. The cart passed the head of the bookshelf where I was hiding. I could hear the wheels rolling raspy just less than a meter from my face, separated by a thin wooden panel. Cold air radiating from it seeped through the gaps between books, blowing onto my neck, cold as dry ice. It stopped. Right next to my bookshelf. I pressed my face into the tiny gap between two thick volumes of the Encyclopedia Britannica, Vol 4DE and Vol 5FG. That was the only lens that helped me see what was happening in the corridor on the other side, without being detected. In the dim darkness, I vaguely recognized its shape. It was a nightmare stitched together. It did not wear a uniform set of clothes. On that oversized, lanky skeletal frame was a dark yellow raincoat, resembling the coat in the 1998 Oakhaven Lake case. But beneath the coat revealed scorched black jeans, pant legs tattered as if licked by fire. Its left foot wore a woman's high heel covered in dried blood. The right foot was a rubber boot covered in mud. It was a mobile museum of deaths. The archivist stood motionless, its long, deformed arms slowly raised up. The fingers, if those 20 centimeters long, white skin-wrapped bone sticks could be called fingers, began to glide over the spines of books on the opposite shelf. Scratch, rustle. It didn't read with eyes. It read with touch. It was scanning barcodes, or perhaps scanning the souls of surrounding things. I bit my lips so hard I tasted metallic blood in my mouth to stop my teeth from chattering. Physiological tears streamed down my cheeks because I dared not blink. That hand moved to the bookshelf where I was hiding. Its ice-cold fingertips grazed the book spines, just centimeters from my nose, separated by a thin layer of cardboard. I could clearly see the wrinkled, waterlogged skin on its hand, and the black nails, long and sharp as scalpels. Suddenly, its fingers stopped. It stopped right at the gap where I was peeking. A sharp fingernail slowly pierced through the gap, slowly advancing, just a hair's breadth from my left pupil. I held my breath, chest aching as if about to explode. If I blinked, my eyelashes would touch it. It withdrew its hand. Then it bent down. The bald, smooth, faceless head leaned close to the gap. It took a deep breath. Huff. A whispering voice rang out, not from a mouth, since it had no mouth, but echoing directly in my head, static-filled like a radio losing signal. Card number 8492. Thomas Evans. I froze. That was my employee ID number. Still, one item not checked in. It slowly stood up straight. Its long arm reached high, gripping the top edge of the heavy oak bookshelf. Found it. With terrible strength, it yanked the bookshelf hard. Crash! The giant bookshelf wobbled and crashed to the floor, hundreds of books falling like hail. My only protective wall had vanished. I lay exposed on the floor, cowering under the pale moonlight casting through the arched window. And right above me, the archivist was stooping down, its giant black shadow swallowing me. A bone-chilling cold washed over me before its fingers could even touch me. It was the cold of a morgue, of drifting icebergs, paralyzing my nerve endings instantly. The archivist's long, wet fingers grabbed my collar tightly, lifting me off the floor like a rag doll. I struggled, kicking wildly in the air, but its strength was absolute. It was not muscular strength, but the strength of boulders, of inanimate things that know no fatigue. It pulled me closer to that faceless head. The stench of rotting meat and mud was so strong I vomited right onto its sticky yellow raincoat. But it didn't care. Its sharp fingertips didn't aim for my eyes. It was fumbling down to my chest. Rustle. Rustle. It was touching the employee ID card, hanging around my neck. In that moment, near death, my brain suddenly worked at the speed of light. I recalled the receipt. Thomas Evans, processing. I remembered how it scanned the barcodes on the book spines. It didn't see me as a human. To it, I was just a labeled item, and that label was the plastic card with the employee barcode dangling on my chest. It needed to scan the barcode to complete the recall process. It needed that card. "You want this?" I screamed, voice cracking with fear and rage. I used all my strength, grabbing the lanyard with both hands, yanking hard. The plastic safety breakaway snapped open with a click. The archivist froze. It tilted its bald head to the side, seemingly confused when the item suddenly separated from the label. I didn't let it process the information. I swung my arm, throwing the ID card and lanyard hard towards the farthest corner of the room, where the stairs led down to the dark basement. "Take it. I'm returning it to you." The sound of the plastic card hitting the stone wall and falling to the floor clicked, echoing. Instantly, the monster let go of me. I fell with a thud to the floor, knees smashing painfully onto the tiles. It whipped around towards that sound. With a piercing shriek like metal being torn apart, it lunged towards the ID card, long limbs moving on all fours across the floor like a giant spider. I didn't dare look back. I scrambled up, the pain in my leg completely overridden by adrenaline. I dashed towards the main door. The thick tempered glass door appeared before my eyes. Outside, the sky was still pitch black, but on the eastern horizon, a pale gray streak of light had begun to kindle. Dawn. I threw my whole body into the panic bar. Clunk. It didn't open. The door was bolted from the inside, according to the automatic midnight security protocol. Behind me, I heard a frantic roar. The archivist realized it had been tricked. The ID card had no heartbeat. It was not the living item it needed. Thump. 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 Heavy footsteps were rushing towards me at terrifying speed. The floor shook beneath my feet. My trembling hands fumbled for the keys in my pocket. The keys fell to the ground. Damn it, I knelt down, groping in the dark. My fingers touched cold metal. I grabbed the key, inserting it into the lock at the foot of the door. Cold breath blew on my neck. The stench had arrived right behind me. I turned the key. Click. I slammed my shoulder into the door. The door burst open, and I tumbled out onto the rain-soaked sidewalk. Cold wind rushed into my lungs, bringing the scent of life, of clean rain, of freedom. I turned my head to look back. The library door was slowly closing thanks to the hydraulic hinge. Through the narrowing gap, I saw the archivist standing right at the threshold. It could not step out. The dim light of dawn seemed to create an invisible wall blocking it. It stood there, silent, its faceless head pointed straight at me, and in its long hand, it was holding my ID card, crushing it into tiny plastic fragments. I never went back to Oakhaven Library to get my personal belongings. The sneakers, the favorite jacket, and even the laptop containing my graduation thesis. All were left behind in the darkness of that building. That morning, I walked 5 kilometers back to the hostel with bleeding bare feet, packed my luggage in 30 minutes, and caught the first bus out of town. I sent a resignation email to Mrs. Abernathy 2 days later. She didn't reply. I didn't expect her to reply either. Maybe she already knew. Maybe she hired me just to be bait for that thing, so it had something to process while waiting for the real prey. 3 months have passed since that night. I moved to a noisy city 3 states away, working in a loud rock bar. This place is always lit, full of laughter and screeching electric guitars. There is no silence, there are no dark corners, and most importantly, no books. But I know it hasn't let me go. Yesterday, passing an old bookstore on the street, I smelled it again. The smell of fishy mud and rotting lilies hit my nose straight amidst the crowded stream of people. I stood frozen, heart beating wildly, cold sweat pouring out like a bath. I turned my head to look at the book drop bin placed in front of the shop. The metal lid of the bin was shaking violently. Clank. Clank. I ran. I ran like a madman in broad daylight until my lungs burned. And last night, I made the mistake of searching for Arthur's name. The night shift guy before me, online. No obituary. Only a brief missing person notice from the local police 6 months ago. He didn't go back to his hometown urgently, as they said. He simply vanished. But what chilled my spine the most was finding an old photo of the Oakhaven Library interior from 1920. In the corner of the photo, standing faintly behind a bookshelf, was a tall, lanky figure wearing a long raincoat. It had been there since the library was built. It is not a ghost. It is part of the library. It is the immune system of that place, cleaning up unfinished errors. If you are reading this post, and you work the night shift at a library, or some old archive, remember my words well. Rules don't exist to scare you. They exist to keep you alive. If you see a book returned with a due date from 20 years ago, do not enter it into the system. If you hear a book card in the basement when no one is there, do not go check. And if the printer starts printing a list of things that aren't books, run immediately. Don't look back. Don't try to get your stuff. Because I still feel my file hasn't been canceled. My status is still processing. And last night, when I turned off the light to sleep, I swear I heard the sound of rusty wheels squeak. Squeak. Coming from my closet.